welcome to the virtual Sunday service for Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Lake Norman. Our fellowship walks diverse paths to find meaning and purpose, but we're united by our belief in the inherent worth and dignity of all, and the obligation to express our faith through acts of justice and compassion. My name is Theodore Harvey Wigder. I've been an active member of this congregation for a few years, and now I'm honored to serve as president. When we get together as a community, we light a chalice and share a thought about what that means. Today's thought is from Albert Schweitzer. It goes, at times our own light goes out and is rekindled by a spark from another person. Each of us has cause to think with deep gratitude of those who have lighted the flame within us. Our speaker this morning is our minister, Reverend Jobe. We're delighted to hear from him again. As our congregation has got to know him over these past months, I have concluded that he doesn't look askance at many things in life. He's able to hold two or more opposing ideas in his head at the same time and have great fun doing it. That suggests he knows a whole lot of stuff, and also that he enjoys challenging himself and the rest of us. Groucho Marx was another such person. Some of you might have seen the old film, A Day in the Races. In one scene, Groucho checks the pulse of a man lying still and comments, either he's dead or my watch has stopped. Bertrand, about whom we'll hear more this morning, was another person whose head was crammed with contradictory ideas. He once advised that the time you enjoy is not wasted time. And now, I'll turn it over to Reverend Pat, and then to our own Mike Black for his musical reflection.
When Harvey heard that I was doing a sermon asking what is life really all about, he said, "Oh, you'll be talking about Socrates." Well, I wasn't going to talk about Socrates, but inspired by Harvey, once again, I went and looked up some Socrates quotes. And there are a bunch of good ones. I recommend that you Google Socrates quotes and then just scroll through. He was quite the guy. The one I picked out for today, I have slightly rewritten to make it more politically correct. Let those who would move the world move themselves first. Let those who would move the world move themselves first. I'm a big old mess. I've got allergies that I have medicated many different ways, and I'm still struggling. I also feel my heart and soul being pulled in so many directions. And out of that has come this question: how does life really work? That question feels so good. How does life really work? When I used to be a Methodist preacher, I would say to the congregation at Tanner's Grove that life requires absolute and total submission to God. But how does somebody do that? I'll never forget hearing a Muslim father on the radio. He was being interviewed by National Public Radio. His son had been killed in combat with U.S. forces in Iraq. He was fighting for the other side. And the reporter asked the father whether he was heartbroken at the loss of his son. And he said, "How can I be heartbroken when I know that my son was doing exactly what God had ordained him to do?" It's hard to imagine. It's hard to imagine. He was doing exactly what he believed God had called him to do. Absolute submission to God was the highest calling. And I've heard other Muslims talk about that. But how can that be? Our culture tells us that cars and sports and movies and politics are the highest callings of the human heart. These are the things that make people famous. These are the things we pay attention to. And of course, anybody who can make money is following the highest calling of human life. So, let's take God off the table for just a moment. And let's think about the highest callings in atheist terms. One of the most brilliant atheists of the 20th century was Bertrand Russell. And he said, love is the foundational organizing force in the universe. Love. And that coming from an atheist and a mathematician. Let me digress for just a moment and talk about Bertrand Russell. The government tried to lock him up in 1916 for protesting the imprisonment of conscientious objector and poet Eric Chapelot. But friends held an auction of some of Russell's books, and they raised money to pay his fines and keep him out of prison. Among his prized possessions was a copy of the King James Bible taken from that auction and stamped, confiscated by the Cambridge police. Finally, in 1918, he was imprisoned for continuing to rail against the war and especially the late involvement of the United States. This is what he wrote of his imprisonment. I found prison in many ways quite agreeable. I had no engagements, no difficult decisions to make, no fear of callers, no interruptions in my work. I read enormously. I wrote a book, Introduction to Mathematical Philosophy, and began the work for the analysis of mind. I was rather interested in my fellow prisoners, who seemed to me in no way morally inferior to the rest of the population, though they were on the whole slightly below the usual level of intelligence, as was shown by their having gotten caught. The record also needs to show that Russell was joined in prison by other academics and members of the British Parliament who opposed the war. Rarely in human history has there been a war that was quite so pointless or deadly as World War I. The fact that the World War II generation got a reputation for fighting the good war or the justifiable war has clouded our thinking about militarism ever since. Only one war in American history has been universally supported by the American public, and that, of course, was World War II. We got a warning from one of the heroes of the Second World War, Dwight David Eisenhower, who in his final address warned us about the coming industrial military complex. The military-industrial complex. A warning that has not been heeded by very many of our modern leaders. Okay, back to the topic at hand. Digression over. God. The word God is intended to symbolize the absolute and ultimate power in the universe. Yet we know great deeds have been done, great thoughts have been written, great inspiration has come from people who didn't believe in a separate God, a separate godlike figure, a separate godlike energy, and from people who believed in all kinds of godlike figures and energies beyond the Christian or Muslim or Jewish God. Holy Spirit, Jesus, Buddha, these different names that have been assigned to this ultimate power. This is why Unitarian Universalism is so important to me. It honors how the ultimate may be found without use of the word God, or without absolute or total submission to a Christian or Muslim or Jewish God. So, how does life work? How does life work? What does demand our absolute and total submission? Clearly, love is an important demand. We are called to love each other and life itself from any number of sources. Poetry and drama and movies and television show us love is foundational to the structure of good lives, not just the structure of the universe, as Bertrand Russell argued. What about basic goodness? Doing no harm, living in peaceful harmony with others, treading lightly on a world that is demanding environmental balance. Yes to all of that too. But does it not belabor the point? Would not everything on that list flow naturally from love? If we are capable of acting in genuine compassion, affection, tenderness of heart toward all other beings and life itself, would we not accomplish all the good we could dream of with clarity and ease? There it is. Life works best when we are loving and kind and tender toward others, ourselves, and life itself. Maybe we could fall in love with everything. Could we? Could we fall in love with everything? There's no doubt that love is confusing. When 9 people were killed in the basement of a Charleston church on June 17th, 2015, many of their family members immediately made public statements of forgiveness for the shooter. This scandalized others in the anti-racism movement. They protested that instant forgiveness lets the killer off the hook. And while I certainly understand how they feel, I must side with forgiveness as a key element of living a loving life. Forgiveness is a key element of living a loving life. Any failure to forgive glues us to the anger, fear, anxiety, resentment, and other hurtful emotions. This glue sticks to our hearts and other internal organs. Let me be very clear. I believe people have to live with the consequences of their actions. There's no question. Forgiving a killer does not grant pardon. While the Charleston shooter and the Atlanta shooter of recent weeks and the Boulder, Colorado shooter of recent weeks will all likely spend most of the rest of their lives in prison, the pain they have inflicted can be eased through forgiveness. Just as it is important that we forgive in order to unstick the glue of anger, fear, anxiety, resentment, it is also important that people live with the consequences of their actions. Unsticking that glue and letting those chunks of awful emotion float on down the river is vitally important, and it may require active participation on more than one occasion. One of my teachers told me to forgive myself every day, like taking a shower. Imagine that. As an embarrassing memory or fear or anxiety floats into our awareness, we simply wash it away with forgiveness. We let it float down the river of our imagination as we use that shower to unstick the glue. As we do this, as we take deep breaths of relaxing forgiveness, yes, even self-forgiveness, we create within ourselves the wherewithal to again love, to share, to act with compassion and kindness and joy and peace. If coming unglued sounds a little too much like going crazy, just think how wonderful it might be to go crazy with love. Love for life, love for self, and of course, love for others. But hold on here a minute now, Mr. Minister. Aren't there plenty of unloving people who demonstrate what feels ultimate in life to us? Aren't there plenty of successful people who have made their lives work very well, thank you very much, with the tactics of bullies and tyrants and seekers of cheap thrills? Aren't those of us who seek a loving, compassionate, forgiving path prey to the purveyors of political and social tyranny? Yes, we are prey. When Gandhi was asked about using nonviolence against Hitler, One questioner said, "It would mean millions of people would be killed." And Gandhi said, "Aren't millions of people being killed now?" As a young man, I faced the question of whether I would serve in the U.S. Army during the Vietnam War, and I decided I could not kill. As Muhammad Ali said so well, those people in Vietnam ain't done nothing to me. As part of that process, I decided it would be better to die than to kill. Would I defend my family from a home invasion? I would do my best, but I don't imagine it would require me to kill. Here I am again, delivering a sermon. 30 years ago, the Methodists heard me talk about absolute and total submission. Now, it is hard to imagine a Unitarian Universalist being absolutely and totally submissive to anything. After all, we are a religion of rugged individuals. Nobody tells us what to do. Still, I can be strongly suggestive in my ministerial role. Let me suggest the path of Gandhi as opposed to the path of Hitler. We need not kill, though we may need to die for a good cause. Not many are forced to that kind of love. Although there are poignant stories of people jumping into the path of a bullet or rescuing a child in traffic, an act of heroism that cost the hero his or her life. We also admire the self-sacrifice of parents, siblings, and friends. I once heard a brilliant sermon about the quote from Jesus, "No greater love hath any man than to lay down his life for his friend." The minister was saying laying down our lives does not always mean dying for others. With a much more regular occurrence, we lay down our lives by showing up, by helping lift a heavy load, fixing a meal, giving a ride, or as Natalie pointed out in a recent congregational discussion, we can always write one more check. Sure, it can be confusing, challenging, frustrating to love each other. If it were easy, everybody would do it. And I think an awful lot of people do it. Child abuse is a radical and disturbing reality in our tortured world, but far more parents and caregivers love and encourage their children than those who abuse. I have no scientific evidence to support that claim, but I feel it in the depths of my heart that if it were not true, the world would fall apart in a much more dramatic way than it already is. Love, compassion, empathy, good listening, affirmation, praise, affection, and tender regard build a world worth living in. Frederick Douglass is credited with saying, "It is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men." That's a nice little aphorism that makes us smile and nod. But think for a moment about the world Frederick Douglass lived in. A world of slavery and the Civil War. The world of the harshest and most violent imaginable treatment. His words take on a heartbreaking weight. Repair broken men. Oh my. How many broken men did Frederick Douglass know? How often did Frederick Douglass walk with, talk with men and women who knew the scars left by whips, the rough remains of chains, and the loss of any hope broken into their minds and souls by slavery and war? Yes, let's build strong children. Thank you for supporting Autumn Weathers and her work with our strong children. Thank you for believing in the possibility of building strong children. Again, through love, compassion, empathy, good listening, praise, affection, and tender regard. Even though the words and symbols have gone through a dramatic evolution in the past 30 years, I still encourage absolute and total submission. Give up anything that keeps you from love. Relax. Take a deep breath. Don't take yourself so seriously. Groucho Marx may have said he didn't want to belong to any club that would have him for a member. But we know better. We know that our belonging to each other is important. This congregation stands for loving kindness that will stand the test of time. Absolute and total submission to the path of love is its own reward. It's what people like us do. Maybe sometimes frustrated and dismayed by how hard it is, other times laughing with joy and how good it feels. We submit. Sometimes we have to take one step forward and two steps back, but we submit. We have to clarify. Did you really mean what you just said? Did I understand you to say what I think you said? But we submit. We stand in a long line of people who did not give up. People who were willing to go to prison to oppose a war. People who fed the hungry, clothed the naked, and made peace. No, it was not easy. But lots of times it was easier, and they did it. The work, the help, the laughter, the joy. Lots of times it was even easy. Deep within us, there is a steady place that understands finally there is only one way. We are supposed to love each other. That's the way life really works. That's what life is really all about.
Greetings, it's a lovely spring morning. This is called Over and Over. There's a moment that's passing you by. Lift the shadows from your blue skies. Throw your heart in the ring. Shake some dust off and spread your wings. Let your love show again and again. Over and over, over and over. There's a fire that's burning inside of you. Let me show you the one that's steadfast and true. What's the use in the rain? Falling hard on bones so pain. Let your love show again and again. Over and over, over and over and there's a fire that's burning inside of me. Love in the world, yeah, peace in the valley. Hey, it's calling for you. Are you feeling it too? Let your love show again and again. Over and over and over and over. Let your love show again and again. Over and over and over and over. Let your love show again and again. Over and over and over and over. Take care, y'all.
Thank you, Pat, for your guidance, experience, and wisdom this morning. We are grateful for your words, and grateful to you, Mike, for catching the spirit of Pat's message. And now for a few announcements. If you're a visitor, welcome. I'm so pleased you chose to give our virtual service a try. If you like what you've heard so far and are wondering how to stay connected with our congregation, please reach out to our membership chair, Linda. Our email address is right here at the bottom of the screen. You can even get on the email list for a weekly newsletter. You'll have a head start on the Sunday service and check out all the activities we are still pursuing, even during the pandemic. We encourage members to continue reaching out to one another virtually whenever possible. Make regular Skype or Zoom dates or just pick up the telephone. It's important we put in extra effort to sustain the deep bonds our community has formed. I'd like to close with the words of UU minister Duke T. Gray. He said, "The blessing of truth be upon us, the power of love direct and sustain us, and may the peace of this community preserve our going out and our coming in from this time forth until we meet again." So goodbye, go out there and show gratitude for all the wonderful things in the world until we meet again. Blessed be.